Hey there, everyone. Welcome to this Ask the Trainer session. Today, it is very exciting because we are not just the Maxon Training Team, but we also have a guest. Chris Schmidt is here from Lasso. And before we jump in, well, I seem to have, yeah, here we go. Here we go. I want to share my screen, but for some reason,
all sorts of technical issues today.
Strange right now. Oh,
it's come
here we
up
go.
for me.
I have it. Now you should see my screen. Sorry for that. We had technical difficulties in the beginning here. That's why we're starting a little bit late today. But as I told you, it's going to be exciting. Let me keep the housekeeping short, or as short as possible. Of course, we have to go through a lot of things so that we have enough time to answer questions, and prepare your questions for Chris as well, because today we are lucky to have him here, and he can answer a lot of your questions. So if you go to the Maxon events page, maxon.net/events, you can see, well, all of the webinars we are doing. And yeah, today we are in the Ask the Trainer session, so prepare your questions, as I already mentioned. We also have our last hands-on with Maxon about particles today. And of course, on Friday, our VFX and Chill live show. And on Monday, then, we continue with demystifying post-production. And this month we are talking about color from set to post, which is very exciting. So there's a lot of stuff here, and if you missed one of these sessions, you can always go to the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel, and here you can find the recordings of our webinars, and you can catch up by watching them. Also, if you're interested in certification, we've got an elementary knowledge test, and you can find that under maxon.net/certification. You can see something changed here, and especially for the Cinema 4D one, we've got English, French, German, Japanese, Spanish, and Turkish available now. So you can take the test in all of these languages, which is quite cool.
Very
and
cool.
Yeah,
you don't have to pass it in every language, though, do you?
Sorry?
You don't have to pass them in every language, though, just the one.
Exactly. Cool. And we also want to send you a t-shirt. So if you go to the Maxon store, you can type in the coupon code that you find in the handout section. There's a PDF in the handout section. If you open it up, you'll find a coupon code there, and then you can enter this Maxon as the trainer exclusive wear, and you don't have to pay for the t-shirts, just for the shipping. So that's a cool thing. So get your t-shirt. And now let me introduce Chris. Chris Schmidt is the founder of Rocket Lasso, and he's doing great tutorials and plugins, and he does streams and the blog, and most recently, well, maybe Chris, hey buddy, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. This is exciting.
Yeah, cool. So you most recently created a plugin, or published a plugin, that is called Ricochet. And Ricochet is a plugin that is all about splines bouncing off surfaces. And it is really exciting. And I think it might be a good start if you might, well, either answer some questions about Ricochet or show us something.
Sure, I can totally show you. I can do both. If anybody has any questions, like throw them at me. But I can pull up my screen, and I've got a quick demo set up here.
Well, absolutely. I can give it to you. Here we go. Now you should be able to share your screen.
All right. So here is a scene file. Well, this is the Zygote head from the asset browser. And I've just got this set up so I can throw it into a volume builder, and that gets thrown into a volume mesher. And now we just get a nice solid singular volume. So it's just a good environment to show this off. So if you have Ricochet, you can go to your extensions or plugin dropdown and find Ricochet. And this will automatically create a single line shooting out into space. And I can scoot this up. You see, yeah, single line. But if we start feeding it a model, in this case, I'm going to remote link into it and say the object I would like to collide with is this mesh. I can drag that in and then click the hide sources button. So it will automatically apply some display tags to stop it from showing. Now, if I were to grab Ricochet and drag it, you'll see it's going to be bouncing off of the surface, like a laser would reflect off a mirrored surface. But things start getting exciting when I drag it inside the model, and now we can bounce around inside of it. So my favorite demo to do here is to be like, okay, so that's bouncing with a length of 1,000, and this is the size of a cube, so that we're on kind of default cinema scale here. So let's crank the length up to 10,000 and say, okay, we got a couple extra bounces. Let's go up to 100,000. Okay, a few more bounces. Now let's go up to 1,000,000 in length in bounces. And you can see instantly it refresh and all of these individual splines filling up the entire space. So
that's really cool.
Oh my God, that is so awesome.
Yeah, and you can see as I drag this that we're getting a nice, pretty clean refresh as it bounces around. And yeah, that's the basic version of this, but you're able to push the effects really, really far. There's some really crazy things you can do. I'm gonna pull this back to a more reasonable count, and we can start doing different things like changing how much randomness there is in the bounce. The head's already kind of a crazy shape, so that's not too visible, but then doing something like alignment, I can start taking on the angle of the mesh as it collides with it. So you can now see that's a lot more curvy and following the general shape. But if you wanted to super trap it in the overall shape, we could do something like go to the modify tab, and there's a surface offset here. So if I start adding in, actually, I want to do the shell. So I'm gonna turn on visualize and start cranking up the shell. And you'll see that there's some blue dots that push in, some orange dots that push out. So that is creating kind of an inner mesh and an outer mesh, meaning if let's go to a side view so I can show this very clearly. If I move the Ricochet origin all the way up in between the two, then now we're trapping them kind of between those two walls. So turning off that visualize, we can now see that we're actually trapped on the outer perimeter of the model. So let's fully hide that model. And now we can make as many kind of bounces around that outside as we want. And yeah, from here, it's a spline. You can do whatever you do with a spline, throw this into a sweep, throw this into its own volume builder, and then a volume mesher, give this a little bit more density, a tiny radius of, let's say 2, voxel size of 2. And now we're gonna start getting the nice blobbed out version of it. Feed in I always throw in a smoothing deformer. Yeah, put that in, get a little bit of smoothing, get some crazy shapes. So that becomes alive. But there's so many things that it does on top of these basics. Pulling this back out again, let's pull the length a little bit back so we can actually see it. If you twirl down the length, we have a bunch of different parameters we can do. Something like an offset. I can say, okay, I want to offset the line in space so it's actually traveling around the model. But then there's an automatic rate. So if I give that a little bit of a rate, I can hit play and it's going to be automatically doing that animation. And that's a distance traveled over a second, exactly like the cloner behaves. And then there's also, instead of doing rate, we could do a growth on it. So let's give it 0 length and start feeding it some growth, and that will automatically be growing, constantly getting longer. Those can combine, of course. And let's see. Yeah, I mean, there's tons and tons of crazy things. So I don't know how long you want me to go on for, because I could talk for like 4 hours straight about it.
Forever. This is really cool. This is amazing.
Yeah, so it's super fun.
Go on a little bit.
Let's push things a little bit further, where I can go back to the modify. Let's get rid of the shell. So I'm just gonna kill that off and move this inside so it's bouncing around again. Now let's say that you want a series of lines. You want to have multiple ricochets going. Well, we have a handy button for that, and that is Create Matrix. If I click this Create Matrix button, it is automatically going to create a new matrix. And that matrix, and you can see if we turn off Ricochet, you can see that there's a series of matrix vertexes created on the surface of the model. And each of those becomes a new origin point for a new Ricochet kind of laser that shoots out. So if I turn this on and let's go way back in the length, you can see that I've got a series of different starting points, and I can grow each of those out. So now there are the Ricochet setup to automatically work really well in your model. So it's got 10 different clones directly on the surface, slightly scooted inside. So that's actually going to be inside the model. But what's cool about something like this is I can set the cloner to be on count mode. And now instead of the total length, it's how many times did it bounce. But I'm going to say, actually, I only want to create a single laser. So there's only one segment now, which means as soon as it flies out and hits the surface, it's just done. But using the matrix that we've got, I could start cranking up the count. And actually, I'm going to make these matrix dots a little bit larger. We keep them small so they don't eat up too much visual space. But there you go. You can see those a little bit better. If I were to crank up the count, you're going to see we have more and more and more different matrices happening. So if I turn on the Ricochet, we're getting more and more lines appearing. So I can keep on cranking this up. And now we're filling this head up with a series of straight lines that are only colliding with the overall shape. So yeah, that's another way of filling the entire thing up. And those, of course, could be animated and offset. And yeah, we're just scratching the surface of a lot of the settings that we have in here inside the Modify tab. We do things like see the normals and pass through one side or the other. We can limit to a polygon selection. There's some really nice beveling so that it works better inside of a sweep. Terminator object is really powerful. I've got tons of videos already on this of like how to use every single feature. There's you can even use MoGraph fields inside of it and have them drive some of the different settings inside of the count. Or I'm sorry, if we go back to, I should not have just clicked length. Oh, okay, it wasn't too bad. Good thing Ricochet's fast because I just blindly changed the mode, and currently I have 1,500 different origin points. So now there's 1,500 different lasers bouncing around at a pretty long length, but it actually was able to handle it. So that was a slightly dangerous thing to do. Although we do have a point cap to stop it from going too far. But let's go and pull way back on that. And let me think of another. Well, let me actually pop open a different scene file.
One of the things, so I haven't seen a lot of the material that you have put out on this yet, but I did watch the video and I saw, and the thing that jumped out at me was the Spiderweb, because that has been driving me crazy for years. And I've been using like textures, but I've always wanted to do it with splines. So I'm really curious to see that when you get to it.
Yes, 100%. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually excited. Well, first of all, when you buy it, it does come with some example scene files, and I am going to be creating a giant examples page that is going to be showing off a whole bunch of additional effects that you can do. So here are some scene files that it comes with, and I'm going to pop open. Actually, it might not have showed that, but hopefully it did. I'm going to pop open the file called Spiderweb, and that will open this up. And this is just a really fun technique. It comes with a file, but I've got an entire tutorial explaining how to make this from scratch. And if I were to take, well, what's actually happening here? We'll just step through it a little bit. You see we have a single line that seems to be connecting from this null to the letter R. What's actually happening is there is a Ricochet laser that is targeting this. It's actually targeting this null. So wherever this null goes, it's going to aim at it. And in that exact same way that we had limited the bounces, here I'm saying I only want one segment. If I said 2, actually we won't see it on 2, but let me set it to a length. You'll see it bounces off. But I'm going to say, no, I don't want to see a bounce. I want to see a count. So that just stops dead right there. And then there's a really cool technique, and I'm actually going to make an entire tutorial about doing electricity effects. And what's cool is that technique doesn't require Ricochet specifically. Ricochet just makes it look better. But a technique you could do is I am now saying that Ricochet should be set to subdivided mode. So there's a bunch of subdivisions happening along the line. And then I'm creating a plane effector, which I've turned into a deformer by setting the deformer mode to point. And then the crazy part being is in its fall off, I'm feeding the Ricochet line itself. So the same thing that's going to get deformed is being fed. So it can see it along the line, meaning when I turn on this deform, it is applying the weight here based on however I remap this curve. So if I were to scoot this around, you can see I'm actually manipulating the way the curve on that works. We could invert it, flip it flip it around, do all sorts of things. But all this means is it starts exactly where we said at 0, and it ends exactly where we said at 0. But in the middle, it gets 100% of the effect of this deformer. So we could change how much that droops down. It's a really clean setup. It's really, really fun.
Did you ever try, and this is maybe crazy, did you ever try applying the CV catenary?
Yes,
that?
that breaks apart every single individual segment. But here's the thing, I did do it with Ricochet and it works really well. It works great.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure to do actually, I probably even have it installed. Yeah. So yeah, I've got it here, and it does work great.
What you did is like it's another way.
Yeah. So that's a CV tools that is available. That's available to subscribers of Cineversity, right?
I believe so. Yeah, it's part of the. It's in the toolbox, the CV toolbox.
Yeah, so that's a really cool tool that will pretty much automatically do this, and it just works instantly with Ricochet. So it's a really cool addition. Keeping it strictly in this world, though, taking it a little bit further, all that I do is deform that line, and now I'm cloning a matrix onto that line that we already created. Make as many of those as I'd like, and then say add some randomness, so they randomly rotate a little bit, and then I grab the next web and tell it to start shooting out straight lines again. But I'm only if it collides with the letter R does it even generate a line. If it misses, it doesn't generate. So you'll see let's get rid of that random, and you'll see, oh, there's a bunch of different lines. In fact, let's transition that in through strength so I can start pulling this up, and you'll see as it moves, some of them start missing. So we only get a couple of lines shooting it.
Oh my gosh.
But then, of course, you could create more in the count, so it's just more matrices, so we get more things colliding. Then do the exact same deformation. Say it is the same deformation, turn it on, and all I'm doing in this case was feeding in web 2, the second layer. So it's being fed itself, and now each of those arc down. And of course, you can go back to affect the strength again. I layer that up one more time to copy more clones onto the secondary lines, randomize those, turn on the Ricochet, deform that, and now we get even more moving down. But what's cool about that is how quickly this now runs. I can move the origin point of this, and it's constantly targeting that center point. Only lines that actually collide will create anything. And now we get this instant spider web that is just created. What's really cool is if you hold down Control or Command on the Mac, I can just duplicate this as I move it and make a second one, a third one, a fourth one, and they're all just working. So.
Oh my gosh, this is awesome. So snappy. It's so snappy too.
I'm really happy with the speed of it. And I kind of discovered this technique by accident. This was not an intent of the plugin, but it's like, oh, we can create a single line. Oh wait, I could clone onto a line. Oh, well, look at this. And using a modified version of this technique is how I would do like the electricity or lightning effect. But I'm going to be recording that at some point in the future. But there's so many combinations. It ties in with the cinema tools so well. Here's the head scan file that comes with it. And what do we got here? It's that same head mesh we were just looking at. And just to step through, what I've got is a Ricochet. What do we got? 2 of these? Oh yeah, there's 2 effects going. So here's a simple Ricochet. Oh, I didn't even show off the matrix. Okay, I got to show this real quick. I'll do this from scratch and then explain this. Okay, so remember how we made, let's show the head there so we can really step through this. So I already showed you that we could create a matrix and feed that in. And we have an automatic, if I set this back to the default of Z+, there's a create matrix button. But if we go into that matrix mode, we can just feed in whatever matrix we want. So in this case, I will make a matrix object, set it to radial mode, really shrink the radius down. And now you see we got 5. So let's feed that in as the source. So let's say I want 5 of those. So now I've got 5 different lasers shooting out. Grabbing that matrix, let's do a radius of 0 and now start cranking up the count. And now you see that we've now got 100 lasers shooting out, each of them striking and then immediately ending when it hits any model, in this case, the head. So if I say file, there we go, file, revert saved. Here I've got that exact same setup. I'll turn off one of them. So with this animated, that will travel upward, essentially scanning the head. But then I clone a matrix onto the tip of each of those, and I tell this tracer to trace those. So now there's a Cinema 4D tracer tracing those individual matrix objects, and now we get a final scan of the overall head. So here's just a second layer, 2 different ones doing the same thing with slightly different counts, spinning opposite directions, and we get this cool, crazy scanning effect. And again, this file is included directly when you download
That's so
a
cool.
copy of Ricochet. And I just want to throw out there that I set up a discount code for anybody who is viewing. So if you do go and get Ricochet, if you use the discount code ask the trainer, then you'll get $10 off today. So that'll only be today though.
I'm
So.
doing this.
That's
this is
great.
happening.
That's
Yeah,
great.
lots of fun, crazy things. Another scene file just being there's no geometry in this one, but doing those offsets we had talked about, where there's a little bit of growth, a little bit of rate, I can hit play with several ricochets and just kind of get this shockwave explosion going. There's no keyframes in that. And oh, and I didn't mention, but in a lot of ways, you can kind of see how this is kind of like a particle system, but this isn't frame dependent. Everything is calculating all the time. So I can just jump to any frame and you see it's just calculated. It is what it is at that time because we know everything that walked up to that step. You can kind of imagine a particle system, but instead of it being frame dependent, we are kind of doing a series of bounces, and every bounce is just another copy until it reaches the proper length. So that is how we are able to just calculate those right out of the gate.
This is going to render so fast because it's just splines and hair render.
Exactly. Yeah. Splines with hair render, with sketch and tune. Third-party renderers love these. And I guess this is actually a fine scene file to show it. But another cool thing we can do is selecting. Now we're just looking at this outer ring right here. Under the, actually, I will lock this and then deselect so that you can see its natural color. I don't want the highlighted color. I can explode the segments, meaning everything is now creating a single segment. Instead of one object with like 100 segments, it's now 100 objects. And then under colorize, I can say, I want this to be random. And now you can see that generates a different colored spline. This is pretty much just for third-party renderers because while you can randomize the color with hair, it doesn't see, like hair doesn't see randomized colors on an object, and neither does sketch and tune. I was thinking about maybe trying to write some code for sketch and tune to be able to see it, but I haven't tried that yet. And we can also output grayscale and click grayscale. And third-party renderers would love to be fed this so you can map that onto whatever gradient you want and get whatever color you want. So yeah, exploding the segments, another fun option in there. And yeah, we didn't really talk about the multiplier field. We didn't talk about the direction link, which enables you to kind of do this internal gravity. So every time it bounces off something, maybe it gets pulled downward. And that's got several cool advanced modes where it might go up and down, alternating, or kind of try and spiral around an object. And man, yeah, so many different things. It was so much fun. And in fact, for the first time in a long time, this gave me a really good excuse to dive deep into cinema and really do some renders. And I was using a bunch of Redshift. So all of the animations inside of the commercial are all things that I made from scratch, learning how to use Quixel and bring that into cinema, and just doing tons of new things in Redshift. So it was really, really fun to actually have an excuse to create renders, because typically that's not what I'm doing. I'm just doing technical end of things, not the final image.
Yeah, well, I love your quote here that you finally found the time to dive really deep into Cinema 4D, because that's something you usually never do.
Well, let me clarify. Dive really deep into rendering, because I'm constantly in cinema, like way too many hours of the day.
Exactly. So here was one question by Sharon. She asked, well, that how to render it. How can I render these splines? And this is pretty cool. A very good question. Well, I think you already, did you render this?
No, nothing that we've done here was rendered, but this one is set up with some hair. You can see I include 3 different hair materials, really straightforward. But as soon as, I guess, as a point of clarity here, you could just go into your create and find, is it under materials? I'm not even sure. Yeah, there's a new hair material. So make a new hair material. And then the only thing you have to do is make sure you go into your render settings and add the hair render there. By right clicking, you'll be able to, add that in. I think,
usually when you create a hair material, this post effect will be created automatically.
Does it automatic? I know it does if you make a hair object. I don't know if it does it with the hair, but I'll trust you on that. But yeah, as long as that's turned on, then now we've got that set up. And if I hit Control R for render, then now you see that it's actually existing here in the viewport. And let's open up another one that I have prepped. So here's this map scanning concept.
The cool thing here is you might have seen it. I mean, the scene isn't too complicated, but the great thing about rendering splines using hair is that it's incredibly fast.
Oh yes.
So we can render like a whole animation of 90 frames with this in like a minute or so. So it's less than a second.
Well, yeah, like I'm actually rendering now while doing the broadcasting.
Yep.
And I think this broadcasting software is slightly messing with my cinema interface, but
yeah, it is.
Here's it rendering like crazy fast. So we're already 90 frames in, and with hair, it's just crazy how quick that is. And that's great. File comes already prepared to do that.
Yeah, that's a really cool tip to use hair rendering for rendering splines. I mean, the other ways would be either to sweep the spline and then render the geometry, but this would always like
it'd be slower.
Yeah, it has an impact on the performance, and also you could use volumes like Chris already showed.
Yep, or sketch and tune, there's a lot of ways of making them real. And here's another example I have, which is I've just kind of got this fake map. I extrude it because we bounce off geometry. So now we're bouncing off that geometry, but very two-dimensionally. So then I had just keyframed this matrix drifting around. So you can see we get like the scanning effect of this map. But I also set this up with some quick render stuff. Let me go to a good frame. So if I hit render, you can see that there's a bunch of, in this case, sketch and tune going, and then I cloned a series of lights onto the tip of the different splines, so we actually have physical visible lights to create this cool sort of hologram map effect.
You know, it's such it's like you started with like such a simple universal like premise, and then you created this amazing tool. You know,
that was the exciting
has
part.
So much depth to it. It's amazing, really. I'm curious about the coloring of them. So I saw the random color, I saw the grayscale. Can you use can you project textures onto them? Or use fields?
Well, yeah, we can totally use fields, which is super awesome. What's a good setup to do here? Well, I'm just gonna open a brand new file. We'll create a brand new MoGraph matrix object. I would like to set this to, unlock that parameter. Still locked from earlier. So we got 40 by 1 by 1. So we've now got 40. In fact, let's set that up to 100. 100 different vertexes on that matrix, and creating this has never happened before, but I think the broadcast software.
Yeah, it's GoToWebinar.
Yeah,
it does that with pop-ups.
Okay, cool. Anyway, going to matrix mode, I'll drag that matrix in, and I can see I've got the series of lines aiming out. Now, we already had briefly talked about exploding the segments and doing the different colors, like random, deselect, you'll see randomly colored. But here's where this gets kind of exciting. We can say from matrix. So I'm gonna say from matrix, and now it will actually be referencing the color of the matrix object. So if I were to feed into this, oh, come on, pop out. Let's just draw it in. There we go, random. So you see this is randomly moving around those clones, but let's turn that off, and I can say, hey, I want some random effector color. So now you'll see that whatever the color of the matrix, it is now the color of the Ricochet line coming out. And anything that could see that color will automatically show up as a super quick demo of how easy that is in something like Redshift. And I think every third-party renderer has some version of this. I shall just make a new material, drag that onto the Ricochet. We need it to be able to render, so right-click and add a Redshift object tag. Tell this to render as something. Redshift can render a spline as hair or boxes, like different geometry modes, but we'll just stick with hair. And then, I mean, if I render right now, it will probably render something, but it won't have the colors. So let me give that a try. We'll open up the Redshift render view, hit go. Let's see. Well,
so that's interesting. So I wonder how.
I might need some sort of light source.
Can we get this color data into Redshift nodes? Is that accessible there?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay.
I'm trying to get it to show up at all. Did you see me miss something? Why am I not? I know. I do this all the time. It's my own tool, and I do this all the time. Okay, so right now we are exploding the matrix, as I mentioned. Let me show you. talk this through because I need to get this through my head as well as everybody else's, because easy to mix up. Currently, this is a Ricochet object, but when you say, here, let me show you. If I turn off explode segments, if I make this editable, it's a single spline. But by turning on explode segments, if I make it editable, we now see a series of individual splines, and each of those splines has its basic tab, display color turned on, and we're setting it to a custom color. So that's what's actually happening behind the scenes.
Beautiful.
Now, it's different depending on your renderer. In Arnold, the tag will automatically filter its way down and apply to everything. Redshift, it doesn't do that. So we created a feature to make sure that you could do that, where we have a tag to segments. And that means if we drag the Redshift tag on, it is now copying that tag to all the different children. Meaning, if I make that editable, there is a whole series of Redshift tags linked on them. And that means they can now render. Very important. And they're just linked, they're just duplicates of this one. So any change you make to this one will apply to all of those children. So now that that's actually getting applied, I should be able to hit go. And now you see that those are getting rendered. So really straightforward there.
That's the object or the display color, right? That you were just showing.
Yes, display color, the display color, which means inside of all your third-party renderers, and I think pretty much all of them have some equivalent in Redshift, I'll search for user, and here's color user data. Drag that in. I would like this to feed out, let's do no color channel, but we'll do lots of emission weight. And this is the emission color. So I could drag that out. So that's what I want to be piped in. I want to get the color user data from it to go into the emission weight. And let's activate, let's see, I think I did, what did I do wrong there?
I think you have to choose.
I have to choose it, yeah. Let's say I want to look at the object's display color. And there we go. Now we're getting that object's display color, and those are getting fed in, which is awesome out of the gate. But as mentioned, I can change this to a grayscale. So now I'm getting random grayscale colors from it, meaning I could then in Redshift search for a ramp, pull that ramp over, pipe our random display color in as an output, feed that out as the emission, which shouldn't look any different because that's that same grayscale gradient. But now Cinema out of the box comes with all of these amazing presets. So twirl down your ramp, click load preset, and here's all these different gradients, and these are accessible everywhere in Cinema. So we can click on a full color rainbow, but we already have that. Let's click on flame, and there we go. Now those colors randomly applied. It has its own random seed applied here, and there's even this little randomize button. So you can just click, get completely different random layouts, and yeah, any color that you want on every single line.
And you could like use, you could probably use like the Redshift hair position node to like get a like fade along the length of the spline segment.
Yeah, as a spline. I'm not an expert on those, but yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, you've got, what is it?
So
is
cool.
it the hair position, I think it is. Yeah, you could pipe this in and do a gradient on every single individual line as well. But yeah, totally do lots of cool, crazy stuff with colors. And I mean, so many of the renders that I did, I'm not going to play the commercial, but I'll scrub through it for a moment. Yeah, we don't just want advertisement, but as a way of talking about, where did I put that? That's inside of videos, commercial, and pop this open. Let me make, I don't know if the audio came through, but kill that. Let's pause that, and I should be able to just scrub through. So yeah, an example here is what I wanted to show is, except for the background, everything that you see here is a spline. These are all Ricochet lines. Like that little ball, you can see here that we start zoomed in on it. So you see all those are actual individual splines generated by Ricochet. But then even the ground here, this piece of felt that the character is standing on, that is a plane given thickness via a cloth NURB. And then I have Ricochet bouncing around a million times inside of it. Now this is pushing the limit. There's a lot going on. So I kept on making the different Ricochets editable, because at this point there are millions and millions and millions of different segments on here. But yeah, there's a different Ricochet for the eyes, a different Ricochet for the pupils, a different one for the scarf and the feet. And you can see that I didn't push it too far, but there's like a horizontal vibe to the actual mouse. And that's because I set up that directional force. So every time it bounces, it kind of wants to go horizontally. And here's like a really thin wispy one where I bounce it inside a volume and just added a little chaos to that. It's crazy the combinations you can do. And once again, this is Redshift. It rendered pretty dang quick because these are just splines. This was just rendering them as hairs. And you can see how far that concept could be pushed.
That looks fantastic. That's a pretty difficult feel and texture to get this type of
Absolutely.
like wool. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not a knit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, just kind of
You
like a
know?
fuzziness, or even a
Yeah.
lot, oftentimes you guys probably get it all the time of like, how do you make a sponge texture? It's like, well, a sponge isn't a texture, it's a volume and a series of holes. But well, it'd be a little dangerous to drop something that complicated directly into a volume, but you can make sponge-like materials from this by putting them into a volume and rendering this way, or just adding all this fuzziness of the felt. And even here, just stylistically speaking, you can see that, I'm trying to find a spot where it's in focus. You can see that this one, the felt on the ground is very smooth, but then on this fuzzy, the fuzzy ball here, I put a random effector as a deformer just to get a little bit of extra chaos so it could sneak outside of the model, and you get this fuzzy vibe from it. And if you set up the materials correctly, it can catch the light in exactly the way that you want it to. And I don't know, it's just really exciting to do this type of
Wow.
demo and all those crazy lines.
That is just stunning. It's
insane.
so impressive.
Yeah. So
And
that
you
was a
talked
fun
about
one.
that this is like pushing the boundaries. What are the frame rates we're talking about if you have a scene like that?
Well, as I said, I even made the
Once it has been
ground.
created,
Yeah.
I think it's pretty fast. But
Yes. Yeah. It has to do
yeah.
that initial calculation and then making it editable. And then actually, what's funny is even making this editable. Our first plugin called recall, I can store the information in that recall tag, make it editable, and at any point later, bring it back to life again, which is the purpose of that. So it actually combos really well with this tool as well. But yeah, I think once everything has been made editable, then, Cinema at this point, there'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe about 10, 10 or 15 different spline objects. And Cinema does not mind an object with a lot of segments. It doesn't like a million objects, but one object with a million polygons, it's going to run super smooth. So along those lines, there are just not that many segments happening here. So inside of the viewport in Cinema, once I make it editable, it's actually pretty quick. But yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, this is the file I accidentally, I was trying to do something, and this is when I discovered the web technique, but even before I figured out how to make them curve. So it was like, whoa, this is crazy. It wasn't specifically designed to do that, but it makes a really cool new opportunity. Here, I was actually kind of shocked that these are a bunch of Quixel models, like tons of them. And this Ricochet is just shooting out a series of lasers, and I just threw all the geometry in. It's seeing the robot, it's seeing every single model here, and it's like it's not running super duper quick, but it still runs pretty well. And here's some cool melting effects inside of the viewport. They pop in really nicely. We get these melty, drippy things. This is supposed to be wax, by the way. So, yeah. Any other questions? I don't want to take up the whole time talking about this. I'd love to tackle some questions.
Very versatile. I think people are just having their jaws on their desks.
Yeah.
There are not too many questions coming in. Just people saying things like, "Shut up and take my money."
Well, it's already available.
Stuff like
As I
that.
said, there's a discount. There's a discount code right now for the people watching this webinar. So ask the trainer at checkout time, and you'll get $10 off.
So our audience is loving it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Chris,
go on.
I have one question. I followed all the questions in the forum or in the chat. My experimentation with your wonderful plugin brought me to one idea. When you fill one of these letters with Ricochet and you use the count instead of the length, then you get a fixed number of points. Then take another letter with the same amount of points and make both editable. One gets then a post-morph, and you drag this second one into the post-morph in point mode. And then you can blend between these two splines.
Yeah. A series of different letters going into different shapes. I see no reason why that wouldn't work. I think that would totally work. And that's why we did the count mode. Well, one of the reasons. There's a lot. But
it works. And I thought maybe you demo it, because there was one question, can we put dynamics to splines?
Oh, that's actually something that's super fun. So yeah, we could do both those things combined really quickly. So let's keep it simple. I'll just create a cube because we can see the shape very, very clearly. and you've already seen it work on way more complicated models. Here's something that's cool is if, the normal cinema workflow is to drop something in as a child, and that does work. You can drop something in as a child. And of course, at that point, I could take this entire thing and move it around as a single unit. But very often I like to remote link into it via changing this to objects mode and dragging it in. And that frees me up to, let me click hide sources. And that frees me up to move this around and have it start in different places. But let's do a couple of bounces. You had mentioned text. I guess I'll morph between two different primitives here.
Do the donut for, oh yeah, sphere.
Oh yeah, I like the donut idea. That's even better.
Because that's different to the cube.
Let's face this way, and we'll make well, first of all, let's take this one to say I want a count. And if we say, hey, exactly. I now have exactly 100 bounces, let's push it further and say 200. I mean, we can do as many as we want, but I'm going to run dynamics on here as well, so let's not push it too crazy. And then let's run a second ricochet, and this time I'll just say I wanted to see the torus shape. Drag that over, and also hide sources button. So now we've got these two different splines. We would have to probably make it editable. Actually, we might be able to keep these live. I'll keep those live. I'll make another copy editable. So this is a made editable one that has the exact same point count. So adding in a rigging, and we need a pose morph. There we go, pose morph. So here's a pose morph tag. I mess this up sometimes. So somebody correct me if I do, but I can go to advanced and say I want to target this first.
You can track it also in the list, but should work.
And then add another pose. And now this new pose I want to externally link to the second ricochet. Going to animate mode. There we go. Looks like I'd have to scoot the position a little bit, but
awesome.
Is there relative?
Set the ricochet to B-spline. So it's
this one has a post effect. Yeah. Let's go to a
up.
Yep.
B-spline.
B-spline.
I know it's normally you get blind when you present. I know that.
Yeah.
So,
yes. Yeah. Burp, 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 burp.
Exactly.
So that's a cool effect.
And now we can put color on it. We can put the delay effector on it on spring, and then we get something fantastic.
Yeah, and because that's a live link, I could randomize this shape. We could say, oh, that the client says that original shape was too large or too small, so we could pinch that down smaller, but it's still exactly 200 bounces. So that automatically updated. Let me hide. Actually, we'll just hide everything. So yeah, now that has adapted the new bounces, and we can transition between those two.
And now think about logos when you go from one to the next, like ATT to Cinema 4D, C4D, and bounce between these.
Yeah,
tons of options.
And yeah, once you've made a spline editable, I'll get rid of that morph. And yeah, that's all editable, so we don't need any of that. And I think our subdivisions are reasonable. I'm in subdivide mode here, but I'll just create a floor object. I have environment turned off by default, so let me turn on my environment. So there's the floor. Make that dynamic. Simulation rigid body, and here we'll make it simulation soft body. And I really love doing this type of spline thing. We gotta be careful with the subdivision count. Right now it's every 5 units apart is another invisible subdivision that we can't see here, but it is real. So under our, well, I should be able to just hit play right now. Let me do 1 frame forward just to make sure it's not crazy calculation time. Yeah, so okay, that's running reasonably well. This is a lot of subdivisions, but you see that this is now a dynamic spline and it will fall and collapse. Things get a lot more fun to me. And actually, let's subdivide that not quite so many times so we can run a little quicker in a real-time presentation environment here. So that should run 3 times quicker. And now the radius is set to 15. So if we set our use margin up to, I think, half that amount, so 15 divided by 2, we get our 7.5. They now have the maximum radius they could have without colliding with themselves, without the line itself colliding directly with its next point. So I always go, once again, just a couple frames forward to make sure it doesn't explode. Now, there's a little bit of exploding, but that's probably because some of those lines were very close to each other. So they're all pushing away, trying to find their natural equilibrium. But this is entirely based on our soft body settings now. So depending on your structure, your structural rather, and your shear and your flexion, or even stiffness, the cool thing is once we enable that to happen, I guess I should have done slightly fewer subdivisions here, but you can see that this will actually collapse down. But as soon as we let that settle just a little bit, we'll see that the lines will overlap each other and layer up one on top of the other. So yeah, a lot of subdivisions there, a lot of soft body calculations, but I absolutely love the way soft bodies run on dynamic splines. I do stuff with them all the time. So let's turn that, I'll pause that for a moment, and it's hard to visualize right now, but if we sweep it, I should have done that in the beginning.
Then we get our spaghetti.
Yeah.
And many food designer will love that.
So yeah, set that to 7.5, which is, no, I've done spaghetti renders before exactly with this technique. And you see these all starting to pile up on top of each other. And because we have the exact same thickness with the radius, then these should not intersect each other at all. We just get this giant pile. And depending on your friction and your strength settings, these can like be a pile or kind of ooze down on the ground. Actually, no, you're just talking about spaghetti. I gotta pull this up because an experiment I was doing using Ricochet and the soft body dynamics ended up not being, it was too weird. It was too weird to put into the commercial, but let me find the render. And where is it? I haven't really shown this one off anywhere.
This pile that we see at the moment would benefit from B-spline as well. Yeah.
So yeah, you can see it looks goofy here because it's like really tightly packed. But then, like as I frame forward, it just I intentionally set it up with a lot of negative attraction on each other through a field force, and so there's a lot of force forcing them away to kind of get this spaghetti explosion. So I intentionally kind of want this pop effect, so bam, and then pile of spaghetti. So that was just an experimental render. I didn't finalize it, but it was like, yeah, that gets weird and fun. You could imagine making this into something gross easily, like some intestines or or some brains. I always get weirded out by like brain imagery, but that'd be an easy one to do as well. But yeah, I love soft body dynamics on top of splines.
Yeah,
we
also
all
cool material.
Yeah, well, actually, I think I have this material available on Patreon from when I did the presentation about S24. Actually, I did a whole series of spaghetti-based dynamic scatter, and that's where I made this material. But yeah, that's Ricochet there.
Wow, that's just stunning.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
thanks. I appreciate it. I'm just excited to get it out in the world. Like we are working out for a long time. We put a lot of detail into the tools that we make. We try and make them really robust. And when you just look at the sheer amount of, we tried to make it simple. When you just look at the main tab, I mean, there's a decent amount of settings, but if you compare it to your average object, like let's create one of the more complicated splines, a helix, it's like, okay, there's some settings, but they're all really straightforward. So this is actually a lot more akin, if you compare it to like a cube, Ricochet is actually a lot more akin to a full-on cloner as far as the amount of settings that you might get combining things, especially once you go into like the modify tab and twirl everything down. It's like, okay, there's a lot going on here for one little spline tool.
So Sharon is asking if you have a Discord channel so that maybe we can ask questions to you later.
Not Discord, but there is a Slack channel. And in fact, as long as it's sharing the screen properly, I will try and pop this up. So you can just go to rocketlasso.com and head over to the community page. And here you can see there is a button to click sign me up for the Slack channel. And it's just an open Slack community. And people there's kind of cool little weekly contests and challenges that happen. And there's bigger modeling challenges. Sometimes they set up, it's really community driven. So sometimes there's these like chain projects that happen where everybody does like 5 seconds of an animation and passes it on to the next person. There's even community articles written here by different people in the Slack channel. So it's all the same people that usually come to my weekly live stream, because every Wednesday I just talk about Cinema 4D and answer questions for 2 hours every Wednesday. So that's kind of where that community grew up from. What's pretty great is that Slack community, I didn't start it. It started organically based on my live streams, and then I started becoming more directly involved in it. So it's definitely community driven, and the community stuff is really important to me. That's why I've always run the user groups in Chicago, and we do half res, the giant meetup in Chicago, and just try and keep everything as open and share openly all the learning. and try and create tools to make artists' jobs better. And it's Cinema 4D's got the best community of any application for sure.
Yeah, and you guys up there have done such an excellent job in encouraging and growing and sustaining that. So thank you for all that.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank all of you for making more awesome cinema users and for making the software in general.
Yeah, cool. So shall we jump to, well, other questions as well? I know that, well, actually, I'm a little bit behind here because last time, well, somebody was asking about how we would make a bug, animating along a surface, like walking along a surface. And here in the meantime, I created a little mech bug, so that is maybe somehow close to what you have, and I just want to show you how you can animate that using C-Motion. So I haven't used C-Motion in a while, but I think I can make it work.
I would love to see this too.
So
do I need to stop sharing before you can?
No, I can just grab the screen from you.
Cool.
So I'm gonna grab it, and now you should see my little bug that I just created.
It's cute.
Well, it's not the best one, but it's got eyes, so in theory it's well, it could walk around and so on, and it's got legs. And what I did in order to rig it was I just created IK hierarchies for all of these legs. Like the legs are just cylinders, and I moved the pivot to up to the top cap, and then now you can just use the goal here, the goal object, and move the legs. And this is possible with all of the legs, and it's also possible to move the whole body, and the legs would react to it. So they would stand in the very same position, but they would react to the body's movement. So what you can do then, and well, this is a workflow that needs some tweaking, and I'm not sure I have the time to tweak it like in the last 5 minutes here. But what you can do to animate it and to make it walk is you go to character, C-Motion, and all of these insects, if they are like just walking from one point to the other and not doing something special in between, then C-Motion is a very cool thing, because C-Motion is more or less like an animation cycle generator, and therefore it's cool for walk cycles for insects and so on. So here we've got C-Motion, and what I do here, I just drag and drop the cylinder in, and that's my body. And then I select all of the sphere goals, and I go back in the attributes manager. And the important thing now is we drag it in, but we make it a child of the body here. And if we do so, those are like becoming the legs. And now if I hit play, you can see that it's already moving. What we can do in the C-Motion object is we can adjust the phase here in order to add some randomness to make it a little bit more natural, so to speak. But of course, that's one of the things that that is manual work. You can also adjust the time here. If you set it lower, you would shorten the time for one cycle. Like now it is 15 frames per cycle. And another thing you can do is you can add actions here. So right now it's just going forward and backward, but you can also add a lift, for example. So let's add a lift, And then there should be one. Well, that didn't work for some reason. Lift add. Here we go. And now you can see it's this leg here, and it's already lifting the leg here. And we can do that for all of the legs in order to, well, let's just do that. Let's just add a lift to all of them, like so. And another thing you can do here is you can set the walk, well, by default, it's set to static, but you can also make it walk along a line. So this way it would start walking immediately. You can also set it to path. And now what I can do is I can create a spline. Let's just
this is one of my favorite features of
line pin. Yeah.
cycle.
It's awesome, like so. And I'm gonna add the spline here to the path. And now you can see it in top view already that it's walking along the spline here. But that's not everything. Another thing you can do here is, for example, if I add a landscape, and let's just scale it up a little bit, like so. And if you have this landscape, you can go to the CMotion object, and then under, I think under root, yeah, here's, you can find a surface input link field, and we can add the landscape to this one. And now you can see that the bug is now up here. And I think if you align the hubs, it would even take into account how steep the whole terrain is. So if we now scrub the timeline, you can see that it's doing its thing. So let me maybe make this whole scene a little bit longer. And now we can see that this bug is walking along that surface. So CMotion is an incredibly powerful tool for exactly those scenarios where you have like small characters, maybe background characters that just have to walk from one place to the other and don't do anything in between. But yeah, in those cases, you can just work incredibly fast.
That's very cool.
That's what I wanted to show here.
Vitas had a really good question for Chris. He's wondering what inspired Chris to create Ricochet. He says he didn't even think he needed something like this. You know, but like now that we see it, we're like, okay, we need it. We need it. This is a need.
What's funny is that whenever I'm designing a tool, it never ends up where it begins, like at all. In my head, the purpose of a Ricochet was more like, oh, you put a mirror here, and then you bounce it off the mirror, and you bounce it off another mirror somewhere else. It's just going to bounce a couple times based on those mirrors. And then it's, as soon as we start implementing, it's like, well, let's put it inside a cube and bounce around. It's like, oh, wow, it's really, and that instantly it's like, oh, this isn't about bouncing on mirrors on, external models. This is now about filling an object with as many bounces as you could possibly want. And then once we figured out a couple ways of making it so that it would terminate once it hits an object. We didn't talk about it, but you can actually create something called a terminator object. And if it strikes that, you just make a sphere. And if it ever strikes that sphere, it just stops right there. It's done. And the ability to just take a line, shoot it from one point, and know that it's hitting something on the other end unlocks a lot of really cool opportunities in cinema, like creating electricity or creating that spider web. And that's also like that. When you think of the concept, actually, what's funny is before this was called Ricochet, it was called laser. It was supposed to be like, oh, it's a laser and it bounces off mirrors type of thing. And it's like, wait, this isn't the laser anymore. This is now ricocheting. So that's a cooler name anyway.
Yeah,
but yeah,
agreed.
The ideas always evolve into very different things. But even when I made the spider webs, it's like, wow, this could be a spider web maker. It's like, well, I'm not changing the name to spider web maker. It's still Ricochet.
You could certainly repackage it.
Yeah, it's true. Just, like start pulling out functionality and package each one separately. Now, I like making tools for people who are like in the trenches, doing work, unlocking abilities that you've never had before. Like it would be incredibly difficult to do this type of effect because to do something similar to Ricochet, you'd have to fire a particle and be tracing it. But if you're going to get a million bounces, you're going to have to let this thing run for how many million frames to bounce over and over and over again to get that full trace. It's going to be crazy slow. And here it's just like, oh, just drag the slider and now you've got a million bounces.
Yeah, so. And there's like easy controls to limit its length. I mean, it's a very, very thoughtful implementation that you've done.
No, thank
Absolutely.
you. I appreciate it.
So
and
very
yeah, we're gonna have some more stuff coming out pretty soon as well. So we've got a couple betas happening right now. So things are close. So excited for those as well. But finally getting some of these out into the world has been really exciting. Like I said, we're very robust with the things that we make. So very, very detailed. We could be whipping out tiny little plugins like every other week, but we want really detailed, thorough tools that could do everything we can think of for them to be able to do. So
yeah, you did a great job with Ricochet in those regards. Really cool. Really cool. Well, I have one eye on the clock and we have to wrap up here. So I'm gonna
we always go over.
We always go over, I know. And we are already going over. So yeah, let me just jump back and promote a few of our other events, upcoming events. So today, the last episode of Particles in Cinema 4D, After Effects, and Red Giant Trap Code will be live. Tomorrow, we will have VFX and Chill again. On Monday, we are talking about color from set to post in our Demystifying Post-Production webinar. And then there's also, that's not our webinar, not hosted by us, but Epic is doing a webinar about motion design rendered with Unreal Engine. And of course, save the date here for the next 3D motion design show. And yeah, as always, we recorded this session. And if you came in late or so, or just want to rewatch it, then you will find it here on the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. Also, again, if you're interested in certification, we've got these new multi-language tests here for the elementary knowledge Cinema 4D test. Also, there are basic comprehensive certifications and trainer certifications. If you are interested in that, just write us at certification@maxon.net. And again, we're giving away t-shirts. So if you want a free t-shirt, you can have one. And you find the link to the shop here and the coupon code in the handout section of the GoToWebinar interface. And you don't have to pay for the t-shirt, only for the shipping. Cool. So yeah, thank you, Chris, for being here.
Thanks, Chris.
It was amazing. I mean, not just the Ricochet stuff, which was amazing itself, but also the little tips every here and there that you gave, like with the spline rendering and so on. Really cool. We really appreciate it, and we would be happy if we could welcome you back.
Oh, totally. Anytime.
Trainer at some point.
Yeah, cool. It doesn't have to be on a product launch. I'll just come hang out. I love answering Cinema 4D questions.
That's great. That's great. Cool. So we have a deal.
Awesome.
Well, also thank you to Ellie, to Darren, to Sassy, and to Matt for answering questions in the background. And yeah, we see you next time. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody, for coming. Bye.
Yeah.